You were about to say the dream, but you stopped.
Yeah, I had to stop.
That's funny, man.
My old boss would say that every day,
Yeah?
and he hated his job. And it was like a sick
Fake it till you make it.
That's what he was doing.
Otherwise, I think I would have.
Oh, yeah. It was actually I didn't check it for
No, I think it's chill. I wanted to go to that.
You didn't get that push-her side.
No, I just got a blister. So, for the like, that's a blister.
You never seen that thing. Hey, you too? I thought you two got in the ring or something because you guys like.
Wait, what? So, I didn't class yet.
Oh, that's probably why.
It's hard for me, but I love it. That's what I do. Totally get that. Do you want anything or and I like you were talking about quite some time. Well, you see me because they were downstairs. No kids.
Kelly?
All right, I have 8 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. Passing out around a course attendance sheet. If you can go ahead and sign by your name only. I don't have a pen for you, so use your own. This is DNHY 390, the Introduction to Stats course. So I want to make sure you're in the right place. Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. This is not where you want to be on a Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. unless you have to be, so I'm giving you fair warning now. Having said that, I hope I'm able to dispel a lot of the rumors going around about how hard this class is. It's not as hard as it may seem. How many of you have had a stats class before? My goodness, that is the overwhelming majority. That's a very good sign. If you didn't raise your hand, you can pretty much turn to your left or right and find someone to buddy up with who might be able to help explain some of the topics. But this is not your typical stats course. We're not heavy on the math, okay? But what makes this class a bit more challenging than most statistics courses, especially if you've had a stats course, is the emphasis here is on decision making. And that's not something we spend a lot of time thinking about. Okay? So the reason why we have statistics in the first place is because we finally have an understanding that there's nothing much that's guaranteed in the world. There's nothing that really never happens or something that always happens. Much of life is somewhere in between. So the question then becomes, how do we make decisions consistently, reliably, based on the fact that we're somewhere between 100% of the time and 0% of the time? And that's not very easy to do. In order to be able to do that, you have to collect enough data to be able to have some understanding as to what's likely. And that makes it extremely difficult, making sure that you've got the right data and that you have enough of it. So in this course, we're going to teach you how to create a process for you to follow to make those decisions consistent and reliable. All right? Now, some of you are mad dogging me because you're type A and you're wondering why this course is not on Canvas yet. We will be there July 5. For those of you who are just very type A, you'll have all of your sweet candies met. The day after our holiday. Okay, so we have the whole weekend to get caught up and to get ahead of where we actually are in the class. Okay, so Canvas. Everything we do in this class will be on Canvas. Lectures will be made available on Canvas. Your quizzes are made available on Canvas. The readings are made available on Canvas, although they're going to come from the required text. The data sets will be available on Canvas. Communication will be on Canvas. Your grades will be on Canvas. Not because I don't want to interact with you, not because I don't want to talk to you, although yes, I am naturally an introvert who got drawn towards a kind of career that had me deal with computers as opposed to people. So it's not that I'm trying to avoid you, but the Canvas portal will be our primary way of communicating. Okay? So yes, you can still make eye contact with me if you see me on campus. I will stop for a chat, yes. But if you want to play racquetball, let's do that instead. Anyone here play racquetball? No! You gotta play racquetball. If you want to learn, come by. Mondays at 5, Thursdays at 5, Drayson Center. There's a bunch of us that play racquetball. Okay? Great place to get your aggressions out, hit that little ball, run away, hopefully before it hits you or your teammate or partner. As we transition now to our first lecture, there's something I want you to keep in mind for the rest of the remaining 12 weeks. The purpose of this course, and the purpose of your career too, is to increase value and reduce waste. We are in a very exciting time within healthcare. This exciting time, though, puts undue pressure on you. Can't practice the way clinicians used to practice before. Now you're a part of the cog that needs to increase value and reduce waste. And specifically for dental hygienists working in a clinical field in which process matters, that is the bottom line. Can we do more? Can we do more efficiently? And can we do so not at the expense of the patient, right? Keeping outcomes high, keeping health high, keeping satisfaction high. It's all going to fall on you to be able to increase value and reduce waste. So let's start talking about what we need to. This stats course, again, it's going to be a little bit challenging because you're not going to be able to rely on memory. If you've made it this far, you are probably in the 1 to 5% of the US population or human population that has very good memory. Many of the exams and quizzes that you've had to take, you've had to rely on superhuman memory. It's not going to work in this class. To some degree, you've also had to rely on understanding. This probably got you A's. Have you ever heard a teacher say, look, as long as you understand what we're talking about, you should do really well in the class? That won't work in this class. Memory and understanding will not be enough to do well in this class. In order to do well in this class, you have to take what you've memorized, what you understand, and meaningfully apply it. Analyze the data, evaluate the data, and perhaps even create information, create knowledge, create new data. Maybe collect information that's not been collected before. If you can do these things, you will do very well in this class, and not just do very well in this class, you will also be considered a 21st century clinician. I mean, the mark of professionalism ought to be you are current with your times. And so to be a 21st century clinician, you have to be able to critically read a study. In order to be able to critically read a study, you need to be able to apply the information you're reading and determine whether you need to or should apply it, analyze the information that they've given to you, evaluate it, and think about creative ways of, again, applying that to your unique practice. This is what's required of you once you graduate next spring. Is that correct? You're seniors, right? You need a strategy for this in order to be considered a 21st century clinician. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you what's happening in the U.S. healthcare and why it's so important that you take those last four or those top 4 bullet points very, very seriously. This is me, Udo. I prefer you call me Udo. 5th floor may not allow you to do that, but I prefer Udo. Professor Udo works too. Dr. Udo, which you technically can't do until the doctoral degree is conferred. But I prefer just Udo. So if no one's around, just call me Udo. If 5th floor people are around, you can call me Professor Udo or Professor Yo-Yo, whatever keeps you clean. Okay? But let me give you a little background of where I'm at on this campus. Yes, I work with the School of Dentistry, but I also work with the School of Medicine. That's actually where I started from, and I'm still working in the School of Medicine over in the radiology department. That's where my primary research interests are. But I'm not trying to dovetail some of those over into the dentistry world. So here what we're looking at are macrophages destroying a red blood cell, right? So if in your, let's say you have a tear in a cerebral vessel, and the body says, this is not good because the contents are toxic, let's get in there and start to clean things up. What they're mostly concerned about are the hemosiderin deposits within those red blood cells. That iron is very toxic if it gets out into the environment. When that happens though, MR, that is our MRI machines, can do something very unique. This is magnetic, or at least paramagnetic. And so we can see where blood vessels have opened and spilled their contents. And if that happens, now the clinicians have an idea of where to go to figure out what to do next. My job is to try to figure out whether these small little dots that you see here, these are where blood vessels have opened and spilled, or these small red dots are more likely to tell us where this larger black dot is going to happen. And this is a stroke. This is an infarct. Okay? And so my job is to figure out what kind of pattern eventually will lead to this. Because if we see the pattern ahead of time, we can start treatment earlier, perhaps even avert this. I'm also interested in looking at these small dots because we see them a lot in Alzheimer's patients. Right? And so people who maybe they're a little fuzzy, they take some tests, and clinically they're defined as mild cognitive impaired. At some point, they're going to transition to Alzheimer's. My job is to try to figure out what pattern or degree of these small black dots is associated with an MCI patient converting over to an Alzheimer's patient. Because if we can figure out what that pattern is, we might be able to do something to be able to delay that process. Unfortunately, there's not much you can do about Alzheimer's. But if we can delay the onset, that could be helpful. Okay, so those are some of the things that I do over on the medicine side. And so what I'm trying to do right now is trying to determine if not so much the black dots or the cerebral images are helpful in dentistry, but one of the things that I do know about the patients who present with this profile is they have a high inflammatory profile, mostly because they present with metabolic syndrome. So one of the things I'm concerned about is what proportion of dental patients actually present to the clinic with metabolic syndrome? Because if they do, I suspect that might account for why there's a lot of variability in the outcome for that patient. Why is it that after 6 weeks still no improvement, or not as much improvement as we thought there would be? It might be because they present with metabolic syndrome, it's not being managed very well, and that high inflammatory profile is what's making it more difficult to get their condition under treatment. Some of my colleagues and I are also taking these measurements, these are more metabolic measurements in the brain, and we're trying to associate them with kids who undergo traumatic brain injury. Now sometimes you might see kids who undergo non-traumatic injuries, right? Non-accidental traumas, right? And you have to report, hey, we think there's something going on here. But we're also interested in kids who undergo traumatic brain injury. Perhaps they play a lot of sports or they've been involved in an accident. And our goal is to try to determine whether there's a big difference in things that we can measure in the brain, small little metabolites, whether they're overexpressed, underexpressed compared to controls. Because if we can figure out with these very small, finite measurements whether there's a difference, We might be able to tell you that, hey, this is a kid who's going to recover well from this traumatic brain injury, or this is a child who's going to need decades of assistance to be able to kind of function in life. And it's important to know that information as soon as possible. All of that is with local data. But my real baby, my real interest is in having access to tons of data. Absolute gobs of data. And so one of the things that I do is I get every year, I get access to data that for the NIS, Nationwide Inpatient Sample Database, 6 to 7 million patient records. Right? So if you go to the a hospital and you become an inpatient, every encounter while you're there is logged. I get access to that. If you're a kid that becomes an inpatient, I get access to that information as well too. If you present to an emergency department, there's another separate database, I get access to that as well too. And it's these reams of data that we're able to pull together, find cohorts of individuals that are similar, and start to characterize them to see what patterns tie them together, and what patterns let us know what the outcome is going to be. The sooner we can know how things are going to end up, the sooner we might be able to intervene so that we can get a better outcome. More recently, I was able to work with some colleagues over in the cardiothoracic department, and we got access to national data for everyone who's receiving a transplant. And more specifically here, we were looking at whether you could get a very good outcome from a heart transplant if the heart that was put in had a lower ejection fraction. So what we're finding is that a lot of the people who are good donors, when it comes to look at ejection fraction, it's not as high as you would like for it to be. But we're running out of hearts, and people need hearts. So the question is, can we still get a good outcome? That is, we don't get a lot of separation here. See, if we get a line that comes further down here, that means the survival probability is low. But we're hoping that all these separate lines, which refer to individuals who received a heart with a lower ejection fraction, can they still have a very good outcome, very good probability of surviving? And in our study, we find that, yes, there is. It's possible. So now what we're going to try to do is figure out, here at Loma Linda, can we start to, as a protocol, give patients donor hearts with lower ejection fractions and determine that, yes, their survival probability still stays high. And again, this is all data, all national data over the past 15 years, many different groups, some who use hearts with high ejection fractions, some use hearts with lower ejection fractions, and we looked at that data and what we find is we can still use hearts with lower ejection fractions. So statistically, with large sample sizes, we're able to answer very important questions that patients benefit from. Those two slides, or those three slides that had to do with the kinds of data that we have access to, very large sample size, that's a very important statistical principle. If you're uncertain as to whether a finding is true or not, the best way to try to address that question is with data that's large enough. We can't answer these questions with 5 patients, 10 patients. You need hundreds, sometimes thousands. But just because you have a large variety or a large sample size of patients does not necessarily mean you come away with an answer that will fit for everybody. So the second principle that we'll learn about in this course too is variability. And the reason why that's so important for you as a clinician in the US is that this is a massive country. Not only is it massive, there are different protocols for treating the same disease in different parts of the country. Okay? Which means that there will be different outcomes. It's important to understand not only the differences, variability is just another word for differences. It's important to not only understand the differences in the types of patients that present to clinics in these different regions, but also to understand the different types of recommendations or protocols in which you need to apply treatment for these patients. One of the most interesting areas that we like to study is the South. Anyone here from the South or southern state? Which state?
Florida.
Okay, Florida. So much of what we find in Florida isn't going to contribute to the principle that we're applying here, but within the southern states, we find what's called the stroke belt. Have you heard that term before? Okay, so down here we see more strokes in the South than we expect to see, and it's certainly more than we find in other parts of the country. Part of that might be because the lifestyle of those in the South is different than those in other regions, but it's also because of other factors, more systemic factors in how people are treated or not treated, and that leads to differences in outcomes. But it's because we're able to study entire regions that we know that there's variability in the US. So one of the reasons why we don't have a national healthcare policy or a national healthcare program, which is too big, too different. How do you provide care for those in the South and make that fair and equitable for those in the Northeast? Some of our best outcomes, health outcomes, are in the Northeast as opposed to the South. Why do you think that is? Why would the results be different or better in the Northeast than in the South?
Money.
I hear money. More specifically, what about money?
You have people who have more access to care. And
Okay.
higher incomes.
Okay, so some of the residents here in the Northeast are more likely to have health insurance or dental insurance, are more likely to use that insurance as well too. Whereas here in the South, there are a greater proportion of residents without health or dental insurance, and even if they did it, or even if they did have it, still will not present to their dentist or their general physician regularly. Okay, so access is a problem, and also behavior is a problem too. We also find that there's a lot more homogeneity for those in the Northeast than those in the South, and that homogeneity allows for more tighter responses and outcomes, as opposed to in the South, where we have a lot of heterogeneity. People are different races, different ethnicities, different lifestyles, different backgrounds, different financial literacy, different health literacy, different education, but far more homogeneous in that regard than the Northeast. So it's really important that these two principles, they're like peanut butter and jelly, like a first name and a last name, without central tendency and dispersion, or a good middle and variability, middle being central tendency, variability being differences, without these two, we have no idea statistically what's going on. So anytime someone gives you a number, right, a statistic, that statistic comes from what's called a distribution. And in order to understand how meaningful that statistic is, you have to understand what distribution or what family did it come from. And the best way to know that is to want your central tendency and variability, first name and last name. Okay. So what I've shown you just so far has to do with the medical side. Do we have these kinds of capabilities in terms of data on the dental side? And the answer now is yes. We have what's called the Big Mouth Dental Data Repository. And you'll notice here are some of the institutions that contribute their clinic data. So all the patients that present to their clinic gets dumped into this data repository. So Harvard, Tufts, UCSF, Pitt, UT Health, Michigan, and now Loma Linda. Okay, so we will go live in the middle of July. All of our clinic data is now in this dental data repository. It's being managed by a group, this Consortium for Oral Health Research and Informatics. I am actually the vice chair for this group. In January, I will chair this group. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to continue to amass more and more dental data. Because the more data that we have, the easier it becomes to get an idea of how are we doing as a nation, and how are we doing regionally, and how are we doing specifically at the patient level. Because you're meaningful, but if we can find more people like you around the country and look at that care and study the care and kind of see what works and what doesn't work for people just like you, then it makes it a lot easier to come up with recommendations that might work for more people like you. So right now we have about 3 million patients in this repository. We're trying to get more. In white, you can see the areas where we don't really have much data coming from there. And so our goal is to try to get more data from these blank spots so we have better representation for the entire U.S. Okay? So we can do it definitely with medical data. Now we have the capability to do it with dental data. Cool so far? All right, so I am just getting back from right around this time in June. Spent about 2 weeks consulting abroad. So I'm just getting back from a marathon trip from Iceland, UK, Germany, Holland. I literally just got back yesterday morning. So I got a little frog in my throat. I made it through about an hour and 20 minutes of the dental lecture yesterday morning. It might be about an hour and 20 minutes this morning, probably less. If it's less, I'm just giving you a heads up warning. I will try to finish the lecture, but if this frog comes out, there's nothing I can do about that. We'll have to see and pick up the next time. Okay? It's also another thing I'd like to do too is, if we're doing okay, I like to plow through our 10-minute break. So we start at 8, we'll end at 8:50, take a 10-minute break, start again at 9, end at 9:50. But if we can plow through that 10-minute break at 8:50, I prefer that we just get out earlier, like 9:30 or so, sometimes even earlier. So it's up to you and how you're feeling that morning. I know it's early, I know it's stats. But if we can plow through that 10-minute break, you get a little bit more time at the end to kind of prep for your next class. So that's entirely up to you guys, all right? Okay. So here's Sir Kelvin. I'm sure you're familiar with Kelvin in much of your chemistry classes. But what you're not so familiar with Kelvin is some of the things that he's contributed in terms of statistics and statistical thought. He says that when you can measure what you are speaking about and express it in numbers, you actually know something about it. So this class is premised on the idea that if you can measure it, we can begin to know something about it. Doesn't mean that our knowledge is perfect, but we've got to be able to measure it. Right? However, he also said, but when you cannot measure it or express it in numbers, then our knowledge is of a meager and unsatisfactory kind. So, I'm hoping that by the end of this course, when you think about all the things that you don't know much about, that you will feel confident that you should try to make some efforts to measure it. Even if it's on a rudimentary level. And we'll talk about the 4 different types of measuring something. Whether it's on a nominal scale, that is, it differs in name only. Or whether you measure on an ordinal scale. That is where you can actually put it in order, like a rank. Or whether you measure on a ratio level scale, which is the highest level of measurement that we possibly have numerically. So if we don't know much about it, that's not bad. But let's make some effort to try to measure it. Once we can measure it, we can start to play with it and start to try to understand it. However, measurement alone is not enough. Right? One of the things that we'll also understand in this class is when someone gives you a statistic, a number, don't just take that stat or that number. You need context around it. So for example, someone gives you a mean. Do you know what a mean is? Or an average? Okay. What should they give you along with that mean so that you understand a little bit more about what that mean is doing or what it can do or what it represents? Standard deviation. Fantastic. So you guys have to have a stats course. If someone gives you a central tendency, they must give you a dispersion around it too. So for example, I've noticed some of you have the same name here, at least first name, right? So if I ask, or if I'm wanting to interact with someone with that first name, but there's more than one of you with that first name, not going to be helpful. What else do I need in order to pinpoint the actual person I need to interact with? I need the last name. It's the same thing with central tendency and dispersion. If you have a mean, you need standard deviation. If they give you a median, you need interquartile range. You need both. First name and last name, now you can actually engage. Okay? So measurement alone is not enough. We need context, and that context is comparison. This is a stats course. We are always going to be thinking about what to compare to in order to understand how meaningful that number is that we have in hand. So when you take it and you can compare it, now you've got an idea of what to do with it. Okay? When you can compare it and say, oh, it's just like, within some kind of standard deviation, it's just like the other measurements or the other groups, then it's not so unique. It's not so alarming. But if you compare it and it's far away from where everyone else is, that comparison is telling you we need to do something about that number. So where is it? Is it significantly above, significantly below? Comparison is the context that allows us to make measurements meaningful. Okay. When we're able to compare, we can get to the holy grail of statistics. That's when we test hypotheses. And when you can test hypotheses, at the end what you have is what's called an inferential statement. We want to be able to infer something about an individual, a group, a population. But in order to be able to infer, I've got to test these hypotheses. And these hypotheses are usually testing or comparing what you observed to what you expected. If what you observed and what you expected are really close, then there's a certain conclusion that you should draw. If what you observed and what you expected are far away from each other, then there's a different conclusion that you need to draw. Both of those conclusions, though, will be inferences back to some general population. Okay? And that's what we want to be able to do statistically. So what we have then is modern statistics provides a quantitative technology for empirical science. It's not math. Again, modern statistics provides a quantitative technology for empirical science. Again, this isn't math. This is decision making. We are here under uncertainty. I want to be able to make a decision or infer something about an individual or about a group or about a population. In order to be able to do that, I want to build a quantitative process for coming up with a conclusion. That's decision making. So it's based on logic and methodology, not math. Yes, at the heart of math is pure logic and pure methodology, but that's all math is. Numerical representations of logic and methodology. Maybe that's why people are so averse to math, because we actually fear logic and methodology. I don't think so. I think it's actually the numeracy of math that people fear. But if we were to qualitatively just talk about logic, you would have no problem with that. If we were to qualitatively talk about methodology, if I gave a step-by-step process for what to do with a certain kind of patient, you would have no problem. But if I make a formula that tells you what to do for a particular patient, now all of a sudden people have issues. So it's the numbers, the numeracy of math that people have issues with, but not the logic. So I want to reassure you that this is a class that you should do very well in, and whose principles you should carry on with after the course. It's all about logic and methodology. So what are some of the things that our group is trying to measure with that large dental data repository and just within oral healthcare? Here are dental quality measures that we're trying to get more knowledge about by studying the patients in these repositories. Diabetes and annual oral evaluations, sealants, tobacco screening, caries risk treatment and outcomes, perio risk treatment and outcomes, and pregnancy and oral evaluation. These are 10 areas in which we're trying to build SABRE metrics. That is guidelines, metrics that clinicians can use to have a better idea as to how well the patient is doing, how well the clinic is doing, and how well the field is doing. Remember, once we can measure it, we know something about it. And we actually have targets for trying to improve or make modifications with it. Okay? How are we doing so far? Good? All right. We'll do this, and then we'll take a 1 or 2 minute break so I can catch up with you and figure out who's who and start to put faces with names. All right, so here we've got some measurements. All right? This is a study that's done nearly every year, but it turns out to be every other year. What they do is they go around the world and they compare the healthcare system of countries around the world. So we'll see here, the primary groups are the quality of care provided in that country, access to care in that country, efficiency, equity, healthy lives, and health expenditures. Now, we don't get a rank for the health expenditure, but we'll talk about this at the end. But every other metric gets a rank. Okay? 1 is really good. 11 is really bad. So you ranked last out of all the 11 countries. Okay? What I'd like for you to do is to consider these 2 questions. Which country would you like to practice in based on these metrics? Maybe one of these really speaks to you. Maybe all of them speak to you, and you can just look at the overall ranking. But which country would you like to practice in? And then which country would you like to be treated in? Okay? So again, these are measurements, and these measurements are now being compared across all of these countries. And now we have a table that allows you to make a decision as to which country would you like to practice in? Which country would you like to be treated in? Okay. Yes.
When it says self-care, does that mean like how people take care of themselves?
Safe care?
Oh, safe.
Yes, safe care. Sorry. Maybe I'll propose to them that they look at self-care as well. We can maybe infer self-care as a component of healthy lives.
Okay.
Right? Healthy lives, the system is responsible for a portion of that, but at the end of the day, the individual, the patient is responsible for how healthy their life is. Anyone having difficulty with the table? Okay. Anyone having difficulty picking a country for the first question? Some difficulty. Okay. Well, it's good that you're thinking about this now. Not that you're going to be able to choose. Well, maybe you do. Maybe you can choose which country you want to practice in, but most likely it's going to be which state or which county. All right. How many people have an answer for which country they'd like to practice in? Okay, so we have some decision makers here. How many have a country for which one you'd like to be treated in? I see more hands for that, or at least more confident hands. So let's go with the first one. This is I don't have any labels, first, second, third, etc. But which country would you like to practice in? Would someone like to share that with us? First name?
AJ.
AJ, okay. Where would you like to practice?
Far right.
Far right, why is that?
Because health expenditures.
Yeah, let's be honest here. Let's be honest. Sometimes healthcare training is expensive, and if mommy and daddy didn't pay for it, then you might have to fund it yourself. And if you had to take a loan out, then you might be trying to pay off that loan or mortgage as quickly as possible. So in this country, with a very large health expenditure, that also means that the clinicians are making a lot more in this country than in the others. Okay. So that's a very practical. That's a very practical feature there. Yes?
Third from the right?
Third from the right. Is that this column here?
Yeah.
Okay. What did you like about this country?
It's also the one that I picked to be treated in. And I would want to work in a place that I would also want to be treated.
Okay. So that there's concordance there. For a lot of us, we want to practice the same place where we'd want to be treated. Okay. So if you have that kind of consonance or concordance, your first name?
Hannah. G.
Grundell?
Yes.
Okay, so Hannah says this country is where she would prefer to both practice and be treated. Was there any measurement here that really keyed in for you, or is it more of just the overall ranking?
Yeah, kind of just the average of the overall ranking.
Okay.
I'm assuming access is cost-related problem. Like the cost-related problem is a 7, it's kind of high, but I'm assuming if I'm practicing there in this field, money isn't a super big.
You'll be in that top 5%.
Yeah. So
You'll be able to afford it.
Kind of offset.
Very good. I'm seeing some very intelligent decision makers here. Okay. Anyone else about which country you'd like to be treated in?
Ones.
The ones you would. Okay. All right. So
You said ones was the bus.
that's the best. That's the best. So some of us want to be treated where's the quality of care that's going to be the best. Access to care is going to be the best. I believe here we're looking at efficacy. Is that efficiency or efficacy? Efficiency. Or that's the best. Okay. Make sense? Yes.
I just have a statistical question.
Please.
So why, since that one is clearly so highly good, would healthy lives be so opposite?
Oh, that's awesome. That is an awesome question. Shall we delve into that for a little bit before the grand reveal of which country is which? So the question is, how is it statistically possible? And this is where we're going to get a very nice education into how stats doesn't answer every question. Sometimes sociology has to get involved, or maybe our pastors or priests. But this country has an overall ranking of 1. Boom, 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 boom. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And then down in Healthy Lives, wow, wow. How is that even possible? They're doing all the great stuff. How is that even possible that these guys do not seem to be influencing this metric? How is that possible?
Bad statistics.
Could be bad statistics. Could be. And there are times when the statisticians or the analysts involved are not doing great stats. But this is a situation in which we get to push back and say, it's not us. What else could explain this phenomenon?
They're not doing their part.
Sorry?
They're not doing their part.
Ooh. Who's they? Oh, the people.
What did she say?
She said the people are not doing their part. So for example, let's say like here at Loma Linda, level 1 trauma, right? What happens when someone out there gets into a really bad accident? And the ambulance or the chopper has to make a decision as to where to take this patient. Let's say you're 2 minutes away from county, but you're 15 minutes away from Loma Linda.
It's based on your insurance.
Could be based on insurance, but if it's an emergency, it shouldn't.
You're gonna go to the
You're supposed to go to county. Then what does county do?
Don't you look?
This is too difficult for us. You go to Loma Linda, right? And so oftentimes what happens is Loma Linda gets the worst cases at the worst times, and then they're scrambling to try to figure something out, right? There's a phenomenon that you should be familiar with. You can have a technically successful surgery and a poor outcome, right? Surgery went well, patient didn't survive. But the surgery was a success. But this patient was going to die whether they had the surgery or not, right? Okay. Oftentimes that happens here too. Patient presented, right care was given, quality of care was good, high. But when it came time for the patient to make a decision, like, great, thanks for the new lung, I'm going to keep smoking anyway. A lot of times, and we'll see what the country is, a lot of times what we find is that much of the healthcare outcomes has nothing to do with the kind or quality of care provided, has everything to do with the decisions that the patient or that the individual makes. That might be one explanation as to why in this country we can be so high here and so low here, and how in this country we can literally be dead last and not have a different outcome here than this country. This is an example where statistics gives us insight into what the problem is, but is not responsible for the discrepancy between what we consider to be intuitive. That if you're high here, this should also be high. Okay, grand reveal. Grand reveal. Any surprises there? So some of you are going to need to move closer to where the WHO is, right? It's quite good. But some of us are kind of surprised, or maybe not so surprised, that UK, which definitely touts themselves as the leaders in terms of healthcare, and in some regard they are, but the real discussion is, then why are your residents so unhealthy?
I think France cracks me up.
France cracks you up. What's going on here?
It's like they're not patient-centered, the access isn't that great, but they live pretty healthy lives.
Sure. Don't worry about it.
All that
Have a glass of
butter,
wine.
croissants, like, it's a thing.
Right. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. The Americans and the Brits, they'll worry about it. They'll fight over it. But as for us, good art, good food, don't worry about it. Right? Healthy lives. We don't really need to lead here. In fact, we can be dead last. Don't need to put a lot of money there. It's much better to have good art at home. Right? Put your money there. Sorry?
It almost seems like France is bigger maybe into preventative care, like in terms of maybe the culture, and that helps.
There's something to say about countries like, let's say, Canada, also high into prevention, yet they don't have a great ranking. France, also not a great ranking, but very much into prevention as well too. There are some countries in which they very much are into preventive measures. But a lot of what we find here is the fact that, again, look at the UK, US versus other countries. UK and US are so diverse. They are so heterogeneous in terms of ethnicity, lifestyle, etc. And many of the other countries are far more homogeneous. You know, for example, when National Geographic came up with the where do people live the longest around the world? And there were 3 areas. One was there was a Japanese island.
Loma Linda.
Sorry?
Loma Linda's. Are you talking about the blue zones?
Yes, but you got the punchline. The other 2, there was an Italian,
Sardinia,
Sardinia, and then the Japanese island.
Okinawa.
Okay, the Okinawans, and then Loma Linda. No, I don't know if it's the heat. I don't think it's the heat. But if you look at the Okinawans and if you look at the Sardinians, they're very homogeneous, right? Very homogeneous. Those family structures, very similar in terms of relationships, and especially genetically, and the relationship to the environment. But the one oddball of that group, Loma Linda, very heterogeneous, so diverse in terms of their susceptibility to the environment, yet the consistency there was the choices. They made healthy choices. So 2 groups that are healthy because genetically, maybe it didn't really matter what they did. 1 group was healthy because they made a distinct effort to make healthy choices despite their risks. And so I think there's a lot of that going on here too, where we see some homogeneity or predisposition to healthy outcomes despite what the healthcare system is doing. But over here, again, despite what we put into our system, if people aren't making healthy choices, healthy lives are going to tank. So I'm really happy that without actually getting to the end of this course, you guys were able to take a table like this filled with ordinal data and start to answer really meaningful questions. Right? And that's all we're trying to do statistically. Yes?
Well, why is it that when you hear about like people come to America for like if they have extreme cases they come to America for healthcare? I never hear like for surgeries or different things. I never hear as much England.
Okay, so most people will not go to England for. So let's say you had the cash to spend. You could go anywhere that you want to go to. You want to go to where the best is, and oftentimes it might not be the U.S. That might be Germany or Austria, places where they're more. So, for example, we have our FDA is risk averse when it comes to saying yes, we can use these new experimental procedures. Other countries are saying, no, let's experiment. Let's see where we can go with this. And that's in Europe. And so there might be more people saying, look, the experimental technologies are over in Europe. For example, I have a friend of mine who just got back here from Germany. He has a groundbreaking approach for how to treat prostate cancer. Could he develop it here? No, he had to go to Germany to develop that. And now he's bringing it back here and he's trying to work with the FDA to get this approved. But Europe is far more open to experimenting in terms of treatment, not so much stateside. But in terms of the UK has a national healthcare system, which means there's a limited pot. And in that limited pot, if what you're asking for they deem as not affordable, they'll say no. So if you're dealing with a country in which the clinicians don't get to do a lot of these special procedures, that's not somewhere where you want to go to have that procedure done. You want to go somewhere where people do this all the time and they've gotten really good at it. Really good at it. And that's here in the US. Residents and attendings, they see so many of these cases at the academic setting that they get very proficient. So here it's just a matter of who's going to pay for it. And oftentimes the hospital will or your provider will. But in the UK, the government says, look, we don't have that much money, so sorry, you can't do it. And if you can't do it, that means, well, how many has the top clinician, top surgeon done here? Although they're very good, they haven't done that many. Not a great place to go and spend your healthcare dollars. Okay, any other questions with this table? Yes?
Just based off of the table, what's your choice?
My choice? Well, since I understand how the system works, I prefer the US. I prefer that Europe go ahead and work out all the kinks, right? And then we'll take the technology and build upon it. So I prefer to both practice in the US, where It matters. It matters. Now, what you do with it is entirely up to you, right? But it matters. But I don't like the waste that's involved here. All right. Then the second thing is, where would I like to be treated? Definitely in the U.S. I'm a capitalist by nature. Everything boils down to negotiation. And the negotiations here are far easier than in any of these other countries. So I'd rather take my chances here. And as we said before too, I don't really care if people are nice like they are in France or, well, actually Canada and UK. I don't really care if I'm going to have a good time after the surgery. I just really care, can you do it and how many have you done? And that's in the US. They've done a ton of them and they're really good at it. They may not be great at it. I mean, in terms of dealing with you and the afterwards, I don't really care. I'll handle that. I'll work on what happens afterwards. I just want to make sure you know how to do this. So that's why I'd rather both practice and be treated in the US. Interesting, when they've done this study before, there was a metric that they dropped. It's in the earlier ones, but they've dropped it. It's called right care. Have you heard the term evidence-based medicine, evidence-based dentistry, etc.? Yeah, that's doing the right thing. The US used to rank number 1 in that. They've since dropped this metric from the comparisons. Nobody really wants to be compared anymore on right care because the cognitive dissonance is too alarming when you see that you do the right thing. Well, what's happening here? What explains doing the right thing in terms of evidence, but yet ranking so low when it comes here? And that's when it becomes clear that we have other people involved in our system, like the pharmaceutical industry, who are able to influence people to make decisions that are not in the best interest of the patient, but are in the best interest of their company. All right, let's transition. It's 8:50. I can plow through, which will take about 15-20 minutes, or we can take a 5-10 minute break.
Keep going.
Keep going? Yes. Keep going. All righty. I'll catch your names at the end. Some of you are worried about the math involved in a stats course. In this course, there's only one formula that you really need to memorize. This one. Easy. One little fraction. Signal over noise. Every single statistical procedure, no matter how fancy or complicated it looks to you, is a version of signal to noise. We're simply trying to manipulate this formula, or this fraction, so that we can handle the noise and identify what the signal is. If we can figure out that there's a lot of signal versus the noise, we have a big difference between what was observed and what was expected. If we have more noise than signal, then the difference between what was observed and expected becomes smaller. And it's that ratio of a small ratio to a big ratio that allows us to make a decision as to whether there's a real difference or whether the difference that we're seeing is most likely due to chance. Okay, so just memorize this. We'll keep talking about it and filling in your understanding of it later. Excuse me. Every year, we publish about 800,000 scientific articles. That's a lot. That is a lot. However, it's recently, well, not that long ago, been noted that based on how much we spend on research, which is this is a conservative estimate, $240 billion, 85% of that is wasted. So although we publish a lot of articles, a lot of money goes into producing that research, 85% of it is considered to be waste. Okay? Denominator, noise, doesn't really provide the kind of signal that leads to better outcomes for patients. In fact, John Ioannidis wrote this paper not so long ago saying why most published research findings are false. So again, think about it. 800,000 articles or more per year. $240 billion going just into the research, health sciences research. The overwhelming majority of that is considered to be wasteful because it doesn't lead to the outcomes that everyone expects. What should you do with a system like that? This is a system in which you're both training and going to practice it. I'm not showing you results from the 70s or the 80s or the 90s or early 2000s. This is all very recent. This is now ours, yours, and we now have to own it and figure out how we're going to navigate through that. What do we do in a system like this? What should we do? Okay, so maybe I'll give you more stats so we understand the system. $2.8 trillion goes into health care in the US. Over $750 billion of that is considered waste. Right? 2015, not that long ago, was 3.2 trillion. These are scary numbers. What should we do? How can the US reduce waste in healthcare spending? Well, first, they're saying a large portion of that could be addressed by innovations to eliminate clinical waste, fraud and abuse, administrative complexity, and excessive prices. If we were to address these issues, we would be able to reduce $600 billion. Also, if we were to apply a broad system of interventions to reduce administrative complexity, we would be able to address another $130 billion. This is why I say at the beginning of the course, you need to figure out how you as a clinician are going to increase value and also reduce waste. So when we think about statistics, we're not applying the statistics to win a Nobel Prize. You guys are thinking about what kinds of stats are the measures that you're going to be judged by that have to do with value and waste. So there's a clear mandate from the feds to do the following. Excuse me. Improve health outcomes, reduce healthcare costs, eliminate waste, and also introduce transparency. Why do you think transparency is needed in order to improve our system? Why would we need transparency?
Have a better understanding where our money is going or what's actually happening.
Yes, to have a better idea of what actually is happening. So when we think about it, think about all the data that's out there. Sort of like your iceberg metaphor, right? The tip of the iceberg is what's collected, what we know about. But only knowing the tip is not going to help. If you're trying to navigate a ship and all you see is the tip of the iceberg, what's likely to happen? An accident, crash, right? You're most likely going to get tripped up by what you don't see, data that should have been collected or shared, right? So transparency is really important so that if you figured out how to address a blind spot, being transparent about that allows me also to avoid that blind spot, which leads to a better system the more we share those kinds of successes and sometimes failures too. So again, our goal in this class is to learn the statistical principles that allow you to understand your value, right? How you're going to increase that, and how you're also going to be able to reduce waste. But also, hopefully you'll feel the need to share what you've learned with your colleagues and others so that we can totally reduce these blind spots and affect our entire healthcare system. So how do you know you're right then? So you know something about stats. You start measuring. You start using these measures and comparing. How do you know you're right at the end? How do you know you're right? How many of you have a strategy for how you know you're right about anything? You know you're dating the right person. You know you've picked the right career. You know that you picked the right shirt for the day or the right outfit. How do you know you're right? You're going to vote for the right party come election time. How do you know you're right?
Past experience.
Past experience, okay. That has been helpful. When is past experience helpful? For the little guy coming up.
Something bad happened.
Sorry?
When something went wrong.
Past experiences are helpful when something has gone wrong.
Well, what I'm saying is in the past when something went wrong.
Oh, in the past when something went wrong. That's how you know.
For what is correct.
So hindsight being 20/20?
Hindsight.
Okay, all right. That is helpful.
Having something to compare it to.
Ooh, having something to compare to. Explain further.
Just kind of like what Brian was saying, like having a history of something to compare it to.
So I'm hearing a lot of history, reflections on the past. What critical assumption is needed to make sure that we can apply that to today?
And if you duplicate it, you'll get the same result.
Yes, what do we need to assume to be able to do that?
Wait, right?
The conditions are the same.
We have to assume that the conditions are the same. So whatever the conditions were in the past, if we assume that those conditions are the same today, then it's reasonable to say, okay, I'm going to apply a different technique or a different solution this time to avoid what happened in the past. But how often are the conditions the same? Not likely. There were other hands. What were some of your responses?
Intuition and just running it by other people, like
Ooh.
other people's experiences.
Intuition, your Instagram group or your Facebook group, running it by others. That's one way to know you're right. Groupthink, possibly. Yes.
Sometimes you just have to follow it all the way through and see what happens.
Sometimes you don't know. You just need to go down the rabbit hole, see where it leads.
A test and you think you're picking all the right answers and then at the end you're wrong. So sometimes you just have to see it all the way through and see what the end result is.
So I don't know until I know.
Yeah.
That's how you know you're right. Okay. Anyone else? All right. One way to do that is to run simulations. I'm big into data simulations. A lot of times what you can do with these data simulations is build a model that can think, or at least follow an algorithm, right? But that algorithm has enough flexibility so that it acts like it's thinking. So these are bots. Machine learning has been around for a long time, and this is a study from the 90s, actually. This is not a recent study. It's from a long time ago. And what Mustafa did in his lab was create a bot with his grad students to make money. This bot was trained to look at the markets, study currency, and figure out when to buy and sell different currencies. It's one of the easiest ways to make money on the market. Follow the trends of currency. Okay? What they wanted to do with this bot, though, was to teach it to take a hint. And to give it a hint, we all do better when we get a hint. So they wanted to see how could we give hints to the bot so it understands how to look at these patterns a little bit better. So in order to do that, they gave the bot these images to teach it what a hint is. And there are two different kinds of boxes here. You have the blue boxes and you have the brown boxes. What separates the blue boxes from the brown boxes? Yes?
The brown boxes involve sharp objects.
Which one involves sharp objects?
The brown boxes.
Okay, brown boxes have sharp objects. Sharp, sharp. Maybe. Maybe tart. Yeah, I don't know if tart is the same as sharp. Any other guesses? You're the bot now. What separates the blue boxes from the brown boxes? You're this smart computer algorithm trying to figure out what is it? Now I like to do this with the oral health clinicians like yourself and the dentist because there's a feature here. I'm giving you the hint now. There's a feature here that separates the boxes. It's really important to you guys.
Can you give us a hint about him?
Give you a hint for the hint? Sure.
Absolutely not.
It's an aesthetic quality. Maybe an artificial aesthetic quality.
Oh, they're all shiny. No. Never mind.
I saw a hand in the back.
I think cinnamon when we put the line in the middle.
Oh my goodness, you're describing it. What would we call that?
So then the line is this way.
Sure. What would we call that line?
Symmetry.
Symmetry, yes. The brown boxes, when you draw that line. Yeah, not bad. When you draw that line, you see asymmetry in the brown boxes. But in the blue boxes, we have symmetry. So when they gave the bot that hint, it flew, took off, was able to complete not only this procedure, but was able to find additional applications in the currency markets. Okay. But here's where the story or the research took a different turn. Now they said, all right, let's give the bot useless information. Uninformative hint, right? It's not going to help, it's not going to hurt. Let's see what happens to the bot once you give it uninformative information. And also, let's say we don't give it a hint at all. Would you still be able to figure it out, just like you did? You asked for a hint, but then I think we got it, and you got it before we actually gave you the hint. What do you think happened? All right, let me go over the axes here. On the bottom here, we have the test day number. So this is the number of days in which the bot is trying to make money on the market. Right? It goes from 0 to 250 days. On the y-axis, we have the annualized return on this investment. So is it making money or not? If it's above 0, it's making money. If it's below 0, it's losing money. So what do you think happened over time? Did the bot make money when given an uninformative hint, or just stay flatline at 0, or lose money? And then when it was not given a hint at all, what happened? Did it make money or not?
More money with the other
More money with
the red line, I think.
more money with the red. But you think it made money? So no hint at all, no informative hint. You think it's going to make money? Yeah. It's a smart bot, right? Okay. Let's see what happened. Yes, it did. Your intuition, right again. But it took some time though, right? So without an informative hint, it has the data, there's some initial losses. But then it says, screw you. I can figure out what's going on myself. And as it starts to make money, it says, wow, I really know what's going on now. And then it really starts to make money, okay? And you're right, with an uninformative hint, it actually made more money than without a hint. Why is that? The hint was useless. Why would it make money?
I think because it was still processing variables. It was allowing it to process that it wasn't a hint at all. But
Possibly.
then its problem solving was...
Possibly. We still don't know. We still don't know why with an uninformative hint, the bot was able to make more money than without being given a hint at all. Okay?
Was that repeatable?
Yes, this is repeatable. So this is the same result under many simulations. What about giving it a useful hint? What do you think would happen? Goes all the way up. All right. More money than without a hint or with an uninformative hint. Okay. See if your intuition is right again. And it is. This is a good sign for this class. You have very good intuitions. So with a real hint, right from the get-go, right from the start, bot's making money. And it's compounded. Look how much better it's doing compared to the others. All right, so the real trick here is you're here, you're training under attendings, and the attendings are providing you with all kinds of hints. Some of them are probably really good. Some of them are probably junk. Do we know the difference? You're starting to get better at it? Ooh. Okay. Question is, what happens when you're given a rubbish hint? Sorry? Lose money? Okay. Do you think with a smart bot that you would recover? Like, sometimes people give you bad advice, right? Do you just carry on with that forever, or what happens? At some point you say, this is enough, I've had enough, right? And you try to recover from that. So that's what happens. Bot loses money and it says, I've had enough, right? Tired of losing money. Then it flatlines. Then what happens from there? Does it recover, or kind of stay the same, or possibly even get worse?
Get better.
Stay the same, get better. Okay. Oy. Oy. Okay. I was really hot about your intuitions before, but now I think we might have to slow down a little bit. Why do you think this happened? Why is it that when the bot was given bad information, a bad hint, why did it initially halt the process, but then never recover? In fact, it got worse. What's going on there? What do you think was going on? Sorry? I didn't hear that. What was that?
Low self-esteem.
Low self-esteem? Wow, that's a really smart bot. Very personal now. Actually, something not unrelated to that. The bot doesn't know that you gave it bad information. Hang on. The bot intellectually knows that you gave it bad information, but because you gave it a hint, it's still operating on the idea that this is something I need to make work. I need to find a way to make this work. So initially it says, this is not working. Right? It says, whoa, let's reevaluate this. But at a certain point it says, but it's supposedly good information. I gotta find a way to make it work. So it adopts it as a unique feature of reality. So its sense of reality becomes warped, and now as it tries to make money, it just can't. It can't take all the real data and make it work in this other reality. Look what happened when you gave it no hint. It was still able to figure out what was making sense in reality and what wasn't making sense so that it could make money. But once you told it something that really didn't make sense, and it forced that to try to fit, it never recovered. Yes?
So the hints override its baseline function?
It doesn't override.
Like a higher truth, like a
No. The hint becomes part of its reality. So when we say that, if I were to tell you that a patient with diabetes does better than a patient without diabetes in terms of outcomes, healthcare outcomes, your first 100 patients, you're saying that's not what I'm seeing at all. But what would you do after that?
Try to make it work.
You would try to make it work, especially if your sense of the system was set up to reward that. I'm giving you real data, real hints, find a way to make that work with this data that's coming into you.
So it's reprogrammed, essentially.
Everybody does that. Even though you know that it's not working for this patient, you know you won't get reimbursed unless you do it exactly the way the feds have told you to do it. Even though you know it is not helping the patient, might even be hurting, you'll still do it the way that you've been told or asked to do it. And unfortunately, that's what we find over and over and over again. And that's why in this class, there's not much I can do because I don't teach on the clinic. But what I can do is let you know that there's a cost to bad information. And hopefully I can encourage you to be strong enough, courageous enough, post-millennial enough to say, screw that bad information. I mean, I'll do it to just graduate, but once I leave here, I'm not doing that anymore because it doesn't work. Okay? But I need for you to understand that this is a real phenomena. There is a cost to making real-time decisions off of bad data. So if your intuition is telling you that the information that you're getting is junk or doesn't have evidence behind it, don't be afraid to, at the right time, abandon it. And try to abandon it for something better. Okay? All right, so I don't want to be so preachy. So let's wrap up right now with letting you know what kinds of decisions we're trying to make here. We're making decisions about hypotheses. So even the hints we get are hypotheses, and it's our job to test them, to figure out if this is a good hint or not such a great hint. The best analogy or metaphor that we have is like our criminal court system. All hypotheses are assumed to be blank before blank. So if you were accused of a crime, a criminal crime, right? And you present to the court, you're assumed to be innocent until proven guilty. Right. So let's say you go to court, you have your day in court, the prosecution presents their evidence, but it's not enough. What happens then? Case is dismissed, or you're acquitted. But what's the tag that they apply to you? You're not innocent. You're what? No indictment. Indictment happens earlier. You might be acquitted, but even if you're acquitted, there's a tag. It's not innocent. It's not guilty. Okay, so you're innocent until proven guilty, but once you present in court, if there isn't enough evidence, not guilty. They don't say you're innocent. They say you're not guilty. Sometimes you present to court and you are guilty as sin. But if the prosecution doesn't present enough evidence, they don't say innocent. They say, no, you got off. You escaped the big one. So you're not guilty of what you've been indicted for or accused of, because not enough evidence has been presented. That's what we do in this class. That's what we do in statistics. We have a hypothesis. We need to test it. We're not sure if it's right or not, or we're hoping we find enough evidence to suggest it's guilty, or that, no, that is exactly what we're looking for, or that we thought was happening. If we don't have enough evidence, we won't throw it away. We'll simply say we don't have enough evidence in favor of that hypothesis. Right? Oftentimes people will do the same thing. Now, this is where I will get preachy, but not because I'm a preacher, just because it's something that most people can relate to. The idea about proving God's existence, or prove whether God exists or not. Who cares? You're never going to have enough evidence to prove it. The question is, the statistical question is, what decision will you make if there isn't enough evidence to prove that? So just because the study says that patients who present with metabolic syndrome tend to do worse than patients who don't present with metabolic syndrome, but it was a small study. Only 30 cases were in there, so it's not enough. We don't have enough evidence to suggest that metabolic syndrome affects outcome. Should we or should we not make decisions about upcoming patients about the metabolic syndrome and how it should affect their treatment? What you should do is say, great study, you did well, but no, I can't conclude that there's a relationship between metabolic syndrome and poor outcome. However, next patient that walks in with metabolic syndrome, I'm going to treat them as if that metabolic syndrome is going to affect their outcome. We have real-time decisions that we need to make. We can't wait for all of the evidence. Okay? That's statistics. What decision will you make under uncertainty without complete evidence? So I'm going to teach you how to do that over the next 11, 12 weeks. We're going to do this with a special program called Jamovi. So on July 5, when you go into Canvas, your assignments for next week will include downloading this software and installing it on your laptop. So you'll need your laptop every single week, okay, so that we can run through these exercises. There's a textbook associated with this. We read a little bit from there, but your primary work will happen in Cheryl Willard's introductory statistical workbook text. Do you have that yet? Some do, some don't, okay? It's a fantastic little workbook. It takes you step by step how to complete all these procedures by hand, so you understand what is driving these statistical procedures. Really important to do that. I'm going to trust that you do it. Sometimes I'll ask to look and see it. But the assignments from this application will serve as your problem sets. Okay? All right, so July 5 is when you'll have the Canvas course open. The assignments will be there for next week. I'll see you next Tuesday, bright and early at 8. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me or flag me down if you see me on campus. Okay? Now, before we go, I need your names. So if we can just start with this row and make our way to the back. I need to associate names with faces.
Brian, so.
Okay, Brian.
Dannon Hughes.
Tanner, okay.
Hannah G.
Madeline Gonzalez.
Sandra Haddock.
Naveen Alamali.
Emily Labourd.
AJ Brianna.
Lolina De Jesus.
Okay.
Daniel Diaz.
Daniel.
Catalina Hanna.
Catalina.
Laura Vilas. Sunshine Bollinger.
Sunshine. Very nice.
Kayla Bollinger.
Kayla?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you.
Tiffany Down.
Tiffany.
Adele Anderson.
Adele.
Nana Brody.
Hillary Cobb.
I'm sorry?
Hillary Cobb.
Hillary, okay.
Jessica B.
Jessica.
Christine Moran. Jessica C.
Jessica.
Rachel Covarrubias.
Adrian Carrillo. Adrian.
Adrian, okay.
Grace Rosendahl.
Yeah, we met. Nice.
Celia Marvis.
Kevin Oram.
Kevin.
Christian Montepadilla.
Christian. Okay. Hi. Yes.
Heidi Morales. Selena Monra.
Okay.
Paula Souza. Megan June.
Christine. Eileen Flores. Jessica Geronimo. Jessica Geronimo.
Nelly Garcia.
Trisha Miller.
Trisha.
John Pennington.
John. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Any questions for me?
Yeah, what about the class structure, grades?
Oh, the syllabus will be on there as well. 1 second. Hang on 1 second. All right, so your final exam is 150 points. It's 30% of your grade. Midterm is 20% of your grade. Quizzes are 15%. Problem sets 15%. Self-reflection 10%, and your attendance and participation are 10%. You have to get, a 90% or above to get an A. There's no reason why any of you should not get 90% or above. If you're in that B region, okay, but no one should get less than a B. It's not an easy class, but it's straightforward. There's no reason you should not get an A, okay? In terms of what else we will be doing, I like to split the first hour up more of like, let's take our quizzes, make sure that we understood the readings, get an idea of what the topic is about. Then the last hour will be when we actually work with the data. Okay, we'll open up the program, we'll start running through the stat application and figuring out, so what does it mean when someone tells me they run an independent sample t-test, or a Mann-Whitney U-test, or an ANOVA procedure, or correlation, or regression. You're going to actually conduct these procedures with the stat application. Okay? So the last hour is sort of like a lab. The first hour is more housekeeping, do our quizzes, talk about the topic of the day, make sure we understand it, and then we jump into it in the last hour. Okay?
Do we have a quiz next Tuesday?
Yes, technically, but it's it's not based on anything that you should have been reading.
Okay.
But there is a quiz. Got to start accruing the points. Yeah. Easy stuff. Sorry? What is it about? This lecture. There's no slide that you need to memorize. Do you remember the signal over noise? Kind of? Yeah. Yeah, that's fairly easy. Signal over noise, not signal times noise, not noise over signal, or signal cubed. It's signal over noise. Quizzes are typically like 3 questions. 3 questions. 2 to 3 questions. Next week it's only 1. Yes, the homework assignments are typically posted on Canvas. They have to do with the data we work on in class. You clean it up and then you submit it. We good? Alrighty, I will see you next week. Thank you very much.
Wait, question.
Yes.
Someone